Hey guys, Political Junkie 2414 here, and welcome to what will be the last video that I upload on this channel in the year 2023. As of today, or the time that I'm recording this, it's December 31st, 2023, and I wanted to take some time to, first of all, I want to wish you all a very, very happy new year. Looking forward to 2024. Hopefully I will have a little bit more time on my hands to make some more videos, but I do, thank you all for your support. My channel's grown quite a bit this year, and that would not have been possible without all of you and your undying support. So I wanted to make sure that I address that. But I also wanted since this is we only have I'm recording this, just a few hours before midnight. We are not we did not live through a particularly dull year when it comes to politics. In fact, it was a very exciting year in some of the craziest ways. The opening to the 118th Congress, which started in this January, was quite something to behold, and it's quite a time to be alive as a political observer. And I've found this Politico article which looks at the 10 craziest moments in politics in 2023. I won't be following it necessarily down to the wire, but we will be talking about Speaker McCarthy's ouster and his struggle to even become Speaker in the first place, George Santos, and the new Speaker Mike Johnson, along with a couple of other things. So, 2023, if you look at how it began in terms of the political scene, it was very representative of the kind of dysfunctional year it would be for Congress. Kevin McCarthy eventually won the speakership in January, but it took him 15 ballots in 4 days to be able to win a majority of the vote. He initially had only, around 20 GOP challengers, or which was, I think all of them were from the Freedom Caucus. um, After, on his fourth day, after making significant concessions, including allowing him to, or allowing the Republican caucus, or one member, just a single member of the House Republican Conference, to vote to that. Blah, hold on, I'm stumbling all over my words here, but he made it. One of his concessions was to the Freedom Caucus hardliners in his party that had been skeptical of him, was that a single member would be allowed to bring up a motion to vacate the speakership, which meant that McCarthy would need to navigate very, very carefully if he wanted to keep his job. And so while he was able to get most of these hardliners on board, it went on so long, particularly on the fourth day, because a select six, I believe, were not willing to give in and vote for him. In fact, the only reason McCarthy was able to win the speakership in the first place was because he convinced all of his detractors, or holdouts, to vote present, and so that by doing that, they were able to, um, what's the word? They were able to cancel their votes and still express their unwillingness to vote for McCarthy, but allow the House to continue, because this meant that the House was the spotlight, looked like a circus. In fact, it got so bad that um, that now Armed Committee Chair Mike Rogers, a GOP congressman from Alabama, actually almost got into a fight with one of the last remaining holdouts, Representative Matt Gaetz. So McCarthy, played it very safe, very carefully, a lot more carefully than I would say his predecessors, Paul Ryan, or even John, and especially John Boehner, approached the issue of the Freedom Caucus. Boehner, of course, was ousted, or not ousted, but resigned as Speaker in fall 2015 for a very similar situation to how McCarthy lost his job. And McCarthy was very much trying to balance winning, maintaining his job, funding the government, and passing partisan bills that would be able to that would be able to get the support of his entire GOP conference. The problem was many of those spending bills were too conservative for the democratically led Senate to seriously consider without serious changes. And of course, if McCarthy gave in let the Democrats, work with the Democrats in a bipartisan way that could anger one of the hardliners, hypothetically anger one of the hardliners who may want to bring up the motion to vacate. And that's actually exactly what happened in October 2023. I see a lot of similarities between this mid-term or mid-congressional mid-session speaker election and the October 2015 speaker of the House election. Multiple nominees, um, the only difference being that the Speaker of the House, the Republican Speaker here, McCarthy, was actually ousted, and he became the first Speaker to actually be ousted by a motion to vacate in history. John Boehner knew that he was going to lose that vote um, to the hardliners and the Democrats who would vote to kick him out, and so he resigned as soon as a new speaker was elected. But in the case of here, McCarthy, Matt Gaetz, after McCarthy worked with Democrats to pass a continuing resolution to keep the government funded from October 1st, which was the start of the fiscal year 2024, up until November 17th, Gaetz raised a motion to vacate, and it passed with all Democrats voting for it and 8 Republicans, Gaetz being one of them. And so this sent the House into chaos because without a speaker, they weren't able to do anything. They weren't able to take up votes on anything but electing a new speaker. They had a speaker pro tempore, Patrick McHenry, who for several for many instances was um, considered, or the Democrats and Republicans both considered um, giving him more powers and allowing him to um, let the House take up legislation trying to find a way to pass or to give Speaker pro tempore McHenry more power. But that ultimately didn't end up happening, and the Republicans were without the House was without a speaker for 3 weeks. And so Republicans, or while Democrats united behind House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, and by when I mean united, I genuinely do mean every Democrat voted for him in January and also in the October on all 4 ballots for the October election, which was something Nancy Pelosi couldn't even do when she was elected Speaker. The Republicans went through several nominees, 4 that it took. The first was Steve Scalise. He won a narrow majority of the House Republican Conference vote, but he withdrew a year late or a day later or a day after getting the nomination because there were several members who were unable to or who could not bring themselves to vote for him. Many of these people were members of the Freedom Caucus, and there were a handful of Republicans frustrated with McCarthy's ouster, such as Carlos Jimenez. I'm not exactly sure how you pronounce that, but he was a staunch McCarthy supporter who voted on the floor several times for McCarthy. Um, and so there were proposals that if Democrats or if Republicans couldn't win, or that if a Republican nominee couldn't get the majority of the House to back them, that Democrats and Republicans would have to work together to elect a bipartisan speaker. And so after Scalise's withdrawal, his runner-up Jim Jordan jumped back into the race and won the nomination. And while he faced significant opposition, and by the time that he held his first the first floor vote was held, he was not able to get all the GOP votes and not enough, mind you, to win speakership. And so on his first and so for 3 ballots across the middle of October, Hakeem Jeffries ended up getting more votes, not a majority, but the most votes for Speaker, which didn't mean that he was able to become Speaker, obviously, because you need 50% of all members. But Jim Jordan was not able to get, 25 members of the Republican conference, many of whom were either senior appropriators or moderates who were concerned about Jordan's image as a very right wing figure who may not resonate with independents. And so eventually the caucus voted to remove Jordan as his nominee, and they took up, then the race became kind of a free for all. Tom Emmer, the majority whip, the number three Republican in the House at the time of McCarthy's departure, and is still the majority whip now, was able to get the nomination, but um, in a similar situation to Scalise, didn't even get a floor vote because Donald Trump came out on social media and denounced his on nomination, and basically encouraged and enabled the alt right section or sector of the or alt right part of the Republican conference to oppose Emmer. So that led to him withdrawing his candidacy the same day he was nominated. And so this is when a lot of people really started getting frustrated. The fact that this went on so long was crazy. But Mike Johnson, the GOP House GOP conference vice chair, I think, was able to win the nomination and received every Republican vote. But the fact that the public was reminded or had to witness two very dysfunctional speaker elections in a single year, is quite telling of the productivity of the 118th Congress, which is historically low. Now, a lot more bills are do end up being the congressional session, or each congressional session, lasts 2 years. The current one, the 118th, began on January 3rd this year and will end on January 3rd of 2025. So we're about halfway through, and usually in the second half, a lot more bills end up being passed. But House Republicans are staring down a bipartisan or a government funding deadline because Mike Johnson had to put through another continuing resolution because the speaker election basically meant the House was paralyzed for most of that time that McCarthy's stopgap bill was or granted them. And so by the time that Johnson became speaker, there wasn't enough time to sort out the differences in each of the bills funding the different government agencies. And so there needed to be another stopgap bill. But Johnson's trying to keep his job, and so um, he basically created a continuing resolution that splits up government funding deadlines into two. He made two funding deadlines. Certain departments, I think, expire on January 19th of next year, and the remaining expire on February 2nd. And so this was kind of a different kind of approach because usually these appropriations bills are pushed into a massive omnibus bill, which funds almost all of the agencies. But if Johnson does that, he risks losing um, his job as Speaker because, again, someone like Matt Gaetz or another Freedom Caucus member, another person who has grievances with him, could disagree with the decision and move to vacate him. And so the speakers of the House has really been an interesting figure to watch this year, whether it was McCarthy or Johnson. But I've been talking about him for long enough. Of course, there was Tommy Tuberville's blockade of military promotions. Lasted 10 months because Tuberville was trying to wrangle the Department of or wrangle the Pentagon to change their abortion policy, which basically reimbursed troops who traveled across state lines or traveled to other states to receive abortion care. And of course, Tuberville was not happy with that as a very pro life senator. And it got to the point where even many Republican senators denounced him and pushed him to take up each nomination, which requires these military nominations are special. They require a unanimous consent by the Senate Armed Services Committee, I believe, and Tuberville eventually gave in without any change from the Pentagon. But it was a great political stunt that really highlights just how big or how easily a one senator can affect the whole process. There's some other things here about Lauren Boebert, Jamal Bowman, and Marjorie Taylor Greene's removal from the Freedom Caucus. There was a particular day when actually I don't know if I should talk about this. I'm gonna go and talk about George Santos, because he is really someone that I have been avoiding for most of this video, 1 year ago, even George Santos was the congressman elect for New York's third congressional district, and had come, into the political spotlight early because of the revelation and the news that he had fabricated basically his entire resume leading up to the election. And it's found that he's been indicted of several of countless crimes. Well, I mean, I don't know the exact number, but he is facing several criminal charges back home in New York, and he was condemned by Democrats and Republicans. New York Republicans, in fact, pushed the House Ethics Committee, to take up an investigation into him, which eventually came out at the end of November. The Republican chair of the committee, Michael Guest, introduced a resolution that would expel Santos, and it passed. It passed with with all but a few Democrats and a large amount of Republicans supporting it. And in and by this and after this vote, or because of this vote, rather, Santos became the first Republican member of Congress and the sixth overall to be expelled from the House. And he's also the first that to be expelled who did not previously engage in who previously did not defect to the South during the Civil War to fight for the Confederacy, or had been previously convicted of a crime before his expulsion. Now, Santos very well could be a convicted felon by next year during his trial, but that has not happened yet. And so, the whole Santos is such an enigma to me, because he is such. I haven't talked about him a lot, but he is really just the worst. He's the representation of politics and appearances, not getting things done, not being productive, being in the limelight for his political stunts. And so, I'm trying not to express too much of an opinion here, too controversial of an opinion. I don't think Santos is a very controversial figure at all. I think he would have lost re-election, maybe not even made it through his primary, but by his expulsion, there will be a special election to fill his seat in February of next year. So Santos has really gone down as this con man who cheated his way to Congress and didn't even last a year. He was the first Republican and the first non-convicted or non or person not involved, or member not previously involved in um, insurrection against the United States. And when I say insurrection, I don't mean necessarily January 6th. I mean the Civil War and defecting to the South. And so it's quite a historic. It was quite a historic moment, and Santos even seemed to know that he was going to be kicked out. He left the chamber after voting against the resolution, kind of knowing that there was more than enough support to expel him. And it was quite a bipartisan vote, because it takes two-thirds of the House to expel a member of its own. So the fact that um, the House was able to agree on something that requires such a large amount of support in these polarized times, it's something to think about. And then, I think we can talk about, Dianne Feinstein's death. Or not, I don't know how much we need to talk about it, but the fact that um, she had previously announced, or had announced in this winter, that she would not be running for reelection, but faced a lot of criticism from Democrats who thought that she was not in a good position to serve. She had been absent from the Senate for 3 months because she was recovering with shingles, and then finally, towards the end of September, and this happened just a day before McCarthy, or just days before McCarthy's ouster, Feinstein died at the age of 90. It's quite a quite a political titan who has left us. And no matter what your political views are, I think we can all agree that this was quite a tragedy, and quite um, you know not only a tragedy, but a representation of how old and or how old some of our politicians are, and that is a problem that I think a lot of us need to acknowledge. I'm not trying to shame or speak ill of Feinstein. I think she was a great senator and personally, and a great person. And I am, it truly broke my heart when I heard that that she was not able to make it for the end of her term and passed away. It is, it really does bother me. And of course, there's speculation about moving on from that anyway. I wanted to acknowledge that Mitch McConnell has faced. There's been questions about whether he will be able to continue um, his role as the Senate GOP leader. Um, there, he faced his first opposition from Rick Scott during the lead up to. I don't remember if it was 2022 or 2023, but in the election, the Senate Minority Leader, Senate GOP leader election for the 118th Congress, McConnell faced his first challenge ever from Senator Rick Scott. It was not necessarily a significant challenge, but now with McConnell seemingly having issues or having um, issues or health problems, it does seem to raise the question of whether or not Republicans are going to think twice about keeping him as minority leader, which would be quite interesting because McConnell is the longest serving Senate party leader in history, in American history. He has been the GOP Senate leader since 2007, I believe. Chuck Schumer only got the job in 2017, and the House, I mean, Johnson and Jeffries are the two party heads, they're the heads of their parties, and they are both were both got the jobs this year. So it is quite interesting to see if McConnell's condition sways some Republican senators to think, hey, maybe it's time for a change here. And it's interesting because McConnell is, whether you love him or hate him, is a tactician and a politician with a lot of experience. I mean, he's been in the Senate for almost 40 years, and he has been able to really, despite his unpopularity back home and nationally, he's been able to really um, win over the support of the GOP senators in the past. But after some of these more recent freeze ups in front of press conferences where it doesn't seem where he stops mid sentence and seems to be struggling, uh, it definitely raises some questions about whether or not he is able to perform his duties. But the last thing I would like to talk about is a more recent conundrum. I won't be talking about the GOP presidential primaries yet. I think I'm going to make a video on that probably tomorrow, New Year's Day, just kind of analyzing the state of the race because the Iowa caucuses are coming up. But in the last week or so, two states have disqualified Donald Trump from being on the ballot, and that is they disqualified him because um, because the courts argued that he um, that he engaged in insurrection on January 6th, and therefore by under the clause of the 14th under I think I don't know what clause it is, but Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which bars any that uh, bl- let me restart. I'm sorry, I'm a little out of it. It's late, but um, the 14th Amendment basically makes it states that any person or individual who commits insurrection or participates in insurrection against the United States is not able to hold public office. And so in Colorado and Maine, judges and in Maine's case, the Secretary of State are arguing that because Trump engaged in insurrection by trying to stop the counting of the electoral vote count on January 6th that he engaged in an insurrection and therefore, despite being acquitted by the Senate of the impeachment articles that the House brought forth, that he is ineligible to be president again or to run for president. And so Maine and Colorado have both banned Trump from the ballot right now. And Maine's cases are going to the Supreme Court, where there's a lot of uncertainty about how this will play out. Personally, I think Trump's going to be allowed to stay on the ballot. Whether I think the only way that Trump is really not able to win the nomination is if he is convicted in one of his criminal trials, which is a real possibility. I think a lot of people aren't talking about that. And so I think that that could really hurt his standing among GOP primary voters. And I think that the fact that these two states have stripped him from the ballot over his acts on January 6th, I think that like his four indictments this year, I think actually more than that, but there were four like big indictments with several other charges attached to them, from my understanding at least. Uh, just like those indictments being disqualified, I think really helps Trump in the GOP primary. Now, does it help him with the general electorate? I wouldn't say so, but I think either way you look at it, Trump's really, I think, his only obstacle to the nomination at this point, even though there are a lot of interesting candidates running behind him, like Nikki Haley, Ron DeSantis, and Chris Christie. I don't think really any of them stand a chance in a field where Trump is allowed to continue. Because if he is criminally convicted, I think that that would really inhibit his ability to move forth. It would maybe make his campaign seem a little bit less serious to primary voters and maybe, um, you know, push them enough, push enough of them to say, hey, we want to move on. We don't want to continue with this. And so maybe they would choose someone else like DeSantis or Haley instead. But